The sterile hum of the delivery room was a stark contrast to the frantic, irregular beat of my own heart, which hammered against my ribs like a sharp bird. Each contraction tortured me, a tidal wave of pressure and the fire that threatened to pull me under, a primal scream building in my throat that I barely managed to stifle. But the sound that truly shattered me wasn't the beeping machinery or my own ragged gasps, it was the deafening silence from the space beside our bed. The empty void where the man who swore to be my partner should have been standing. "I'll be in the car," Liam had said only minutes ago, checking his sleek wristwatch with an air of mild annoyance. His voice as cold and distant as the constant stream of business calls that seemed to dictate his entire existence. He hadn't offered a hand to squeeze or a word of encouragement. He had simply turned his back on the agony and the miracle, retreating to the quiet comfort of his leather seats while he bled and he fought for our future alone. As the doctor's voice chewed through the haze, urging me to push because the baby was crowning, the reality of my situation crashed down harder than the physical pain. He was clutching the metal railing of the hospital bed, white-knuckled and trembling, holding on to nothing but a ghost of a promise that had long since evaporated. This was not how motherhood was supposed to begin, in a room full of strangers with pity in their eyes, while the father of my child sat in a parking lot, prioritizing a deal over a life. As my daughter took her first breath and he collapsed back into the sweat-soaked sheets, the illusion of our marriage finally dissolved, leaving me with a terrifying clarity. He had walked into this hospital believing he was a wife, but he was staring at my newborn knowing he was entirely, irrevocably on my own. The late afternoon soon filtered through the sheer curtains of the room we had designated as the nursery, casting long, golden shadows across the unfinished floorboards. My hand rested instinctively against the gentle curve of my abdomen, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the past few months. Standing there, amidst the scent of fresh paint and the faint, dusty smell of sawdust, he felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. This room was a blank canvas, much like the life growing inside me, waiting to be filled with color, laughter, and the chaotic beauty of childhood. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet of the house transport me back to the beginning. It wasn't the grand gestures or the expensive days that had tethered my heart to Liam. It was the fire in his eyes. I remembered the first time he truly sallallahu alaihi wasallam him, not just looked at him, but sallallahu alaihi wasallam into the core of who he was. We were at a crowded university mixer, not air thick with cheap cologne and the nervous ambition. Liam stood in the center of a small circle, his hands moving animatedly as he spoke about his plans for his architecture firm. He wasn't arrogant, he was electric. He possessed a drive that seemed to vibrate in the air around him, a passion for creation that made everything else in the room seem dull and monochrome by comparison. He had been captivated instantly. He wanted to be near that heat, to bask in the glow of his relentless ambition. Our early years were a whirlwind of late nights and shared dreams. We lived in a cramped apartment where the heating rattled and the windows drafted, but to me, it was a palace. It was the headquarters of US. We would sit on the floor with a bottle of wine, tracing the blueprints of our future on a back of pizza boxes. "We're going to build something that lasts, Helena," he would say, his voice rough with exhaustion but laced with hope. "Not just buildings, a legacy, a life where we never have to worry." "In a way, well," he would answer, smoothing the hair back from his forehead, believing in him with a ferocity that startled even me. He was the anchor to his sail, the steady ground beneath his soaring aspirations. He poured every ounce of my affection into him, ensuring that no matter how brutal the world was to his ideas, he always had a soft place to land. Now, that future was no more longer a sketch on a cardboard box. It was the hardwood floor beneath my feet, the expensive house we had purchased last year, and most importantly, the flutter of life beneath my palm. The sound of the front door opening downstairs pulled me from my reverie. The heavy thud of a briefcase being set down was followed by the familiar cadence of footsteps on the stairs. My heart did the treacherous little flip it always did when he came home, a conditioned response of laugh that time hadn't dulled. "Helena," his voice called out, echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged hallway. "In here, Liam," he replied, turning toward the doorway just as he appeared. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes a little deeper than they had been a year ago, a testament to the empire he was building for US. But as his gaze landed on me, standing in the center of the nursery, his expression softened. The sharp edge of the businessman melted away, leaving the husband he adored. "You're staring at the walls again," he teased gently, walking over to wrap his arms around me from behind. His chin came to rest on my shoulder, and he leaned back into his warmth, feeling the solid strength of his chest against my back. "I'm not staring at the walls," he whispered, covering his hands where they rested on my stomach. "I'm envisioning where the crib will go." And in the rocking chair, he was thinking about the light. Liam hummed a low sound of contentment, his thumbs tracing idle circles on the fabric of my desk. The light is perfect in here. It's facing. They'll wake up with the sun. Is the agate sing? He laughed softly. I hear babies and the sunrise are a loud combination. We'll handle it, he sighed, his voice dropping inactive, vibrating against my ear. Just like we handle everything else. Together, he turned in his arms to face him, looking up into those familiar eyes. They were the same eyes that had captivated me years ago. But now, alongside the drive and the passion, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam something else, pride. He was looking at me as if he were the architect of his greatest masterpiece. He was thinking about the early days today, he confessed, my hand coming up to choke his cheek. How much we wanted this. How hard you worked to get us here. Liam leaned into my touch, closing his eyes for a brief second. He did it for you, Helene. For this, he wanted to make sure the foundation was strong before we added the most important part. It is strong, he assured him, feeling a surge of emotion so intense it pricked at the corners of my eyes. It's unshakable, Liam. He opened his eyes, and the intensity stole my breath. You want to give this child everything he didn't have. Stability, a world without limits. But mostly, you want them to see what real love looks like. You want them to look at you as and know what a team is. The baby kicked in, a sudden, sharp movement that made both of us jump. Liam's eyes widened, a boyish wonder breaking through his composure. Do you feel that? He asked, his voice hushed. I think they agree with you. He smiled, placing his hand firmly over the spot. They know they're coming into a home built on love. We stood set in the fading light, the silence of the room heavy with unspoken promises. He felt like a vessel not just of life, but of hope. He was on the precipice of motherhood, a transition that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. But looking at Liam, the fear evaporated. We had built this life brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. The drive that had once intimidated others was the very thing that now protected us. His passion had become our shelter. He realized then that the romantic dreams of our youth were nothing compared to the reality of this moment, the heavy, grounding knowledge that we were about to bring a new soul into our shared orbit. I love you, Helena, Liam whispered, leaning his forehead against mine. More than the work, more than the legacy. You are the foundation. And you are the frame, he replied, closing my eyes and breathing him in. And this, he pressed deeper against him, is our forever. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the room into twilight, but he didn't reach for the light switch. We didn't need it. In the quiet dark, holding the money loved and the child we had made, he felt illuminated from the inside out. This was the chapter he had been waiting for, the promise of forever finally coming true. It didn't happen with a shout or a slammed door. The erosion of us was a quiet thing, a slow-acting poison that seeped into the groundwater of our marriage until the landscape had changed entirely without me noticing until it was too late. At first, Liam's ambition had been a flame that warmed us both. He loved his drive. The way his eyes lit up when he saw that complex problem, the way he spoke of building a future that was secure and golden for our family. But slowly, that flame ceased to be a heart and it became a wildfire, consuming all the oxygen in the room, leaving me gasping for air. The shift began with the missed dinners, isolated incidents that were easily forgiven with a charming smile and a bottle of wine. Then, no phone became a third party in our bed, his blue light illuminating the sharp angles of his face long after he had turned out the lamp. He would reach for him across the sheets, my hand resting on his shoulder, seeking the comfort of his skin, only to find his muscles tense, his mind already miles away in a boardroom he would never enter. When he whispered his name, he would sigh, a sound not of affection but of interruption, as if my need for connection was an obstacle to his productivity. I'm doing this for you, Elara. He would say, his voice tight with a martyr's fatigue. Do you think you want to be working this late? I'm building a legacy. He used the word like a shield legacy. It was the ultimate silencer. How could he complain about loneliness when he was sacrificing sleep to secure our financial future? But as my belly swelled with the life growing inside me, the concept of legacy felt increasingly abstract compared to the visceral reality of my solitude. He was carrying our child, navigating the terrifying and the beautiful transformation of impending motherhood, and he was doing it alone in a house that echoed with his absence even when he was physically present. The chasm became undeniable the day we were scheduled to assemble the nursery furniture. It was a Saturday, a date we had circled on the calendar for weeks. He had envisioned music playing, takeout scattered on the floor, the shared laughter of deciphering impossible instructions. Instead, 20 minutes into sorting the screws, his phone buzzed against the floorboards. The vibration sounded like a drill against my skull. He glanced at the screen, and Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the shift in his eyes, the husband vanishing, the executive taking over. You have to take this, he muttered, already standing up. already walking away. He sat on the rug, a hex key in my hand, listening to his voice drift in from the hallway. It was animated, authoritative, full of the charisma he used to reserve for me. He was solving problems, putting out fires, being indispensable to everyone except the woman sitting amidst a pile of unpainted wood. 10 minutes turned into an hour. Tasum shifted across the room, casting long, melancholy shadows over the unfinished crypt. By the time he returned, flushed with the adrenaline of a crisis averted, I had put the crypt together myself, my back aching, tears drying sticky and cold on my cheeks. He stopped in the doorway, seeing the finished frame. "Oh," he sighed, blinking. "You finish it." He was just coming back to help. "It's done, Liam," he sighed, my voice flat. He didn't have the energy to scream. "Babe, don't be like that," he sighed, stepping over the packaging to wrap his arms around me from behind. His touch felt distant, a rehearsal of intimacy rather than the real thing. It was the London theme. If he hadn't stepped in, the murder would have stalled. "This deal is going to put us in a different bracket. You won't have to worry about anything." "I'm not worried about money." He pulled away, turning to face him. The space between us felt physical, a cold draft rushing through the room. "I am worried that your son is going to be born and he is going to think his father is a ghost who pays the bills." His face hardened, the vulnerability sealing over instantly. "That is unfair. I am killing myself outside to make sure he has the best life possible. Why can't you support me in this? It's a temporary push, just a few more months, and things will settle down." "It's always a few more months," he whispered. "It was a few more months before the promotion. It was a few more months before the acquisition. The goalposts keep moving, Liam. You're chasing a horizon you can never reach, and you're leaving me behind." He ran a hand through his hair, exasperated, checking his watch, a reflex he didn't even notice anymore. "I'm here now, aren't you? Let's go get dinner. Anywhere you want." His apology was a transaction. He was trying to buy his way out of guilt, offering a meal in exchange for my silence. He didn't understand that he didn't want a restaurant. He wanted him to look at me and see me, not another obligation to be managed. He wanted him to ask how the doctor's appointment went without me having to prompt him. He wanted him to feel the baby kick and be on, rather than distracted by the haptic feedback of his smartwatch. He tried to break the gap that night. He swallowed my resentment, desperate for the partnership we used to have. I asked him about the London deal, trying to speak his language, hoping to find an entry point back into his world. He spoke at length, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the conquest, but he never asked about my day. He never asked about the fear he felt regarding the delivery, or the nesting instinct that was keeping me awake at night. He talked at me, not with me, using me as a sounding board for his strategies until his phone buzzed again. And the conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun. Lying in bed at night, the silence of the house felt heavy, oppressive. Liam slept soundly beside me, exhausted by his own importance, his breathing steady and untroubled. He lay awake, tracing the curve of my stomach, realizing with a terrifying clarity that he was profoundly alone. The money locked had been replaced by a machine of ambition, a relentless force to view emotions as inefficiencies and the family time as a scheduled appointment that could be rescheduled. He reached out my hand and he let it hover over the space between us. It was only inches, but it might as well have been miles. The canyon was widening, the ground beneath my feet crumbling away, and no matter how loudly he cried out, the wind of his ambition carried my voice away before it could ever reach his ears. He had promised me a future, but he was systematically dismantling our present together. The sharp, twisting pain in my lower abdomen wasn't just a cramp. It was a declaration of war against the fragile peace he had been trying to maintain for the last 8 months. It was too soon, weeks too soon, but my body wasn't consulting the calendar. And it certainly wasn't consulting Liam. He gripped the edge of the kitchen island, my knuckles turning white as the wave of agony crested and he crashed over me. He tried to breathe, to find the rhythm the prenatal classes had taught me, classes he had attended alone, but the air felt thin, insufficient. Then came the sensation that stopped the world, a warm, uncontrollable gust of fluid soaking through my clothes, pulling onto the hardwood floor. Panic, cold and piercing, seized my chest. The water had broken. "Liam," he screamed, the sound tearing from my throat and terrified. "Liam, it's happening." He was in the study, naturally. The door was ajar, spilling out the low murmur of his voice, confident and smooth, pitching something to someone who meant more to him than he did. He stumbled toward the hallway, trailing water and fear. When he finally emerged, phone pressed to his ear, his expression wasn't one of concern. It was a mask of irritation, a furrowed brow that suggested he had interrupted him at a crucial juncture. "Hold on a second," he sighed into the device, covering the microphone with a manicured hand. He looked at me, then at the wet floor, Andy finally at my face, twisted in pain. Now, you're sure? The water broke. Liam, we have to go now. He gasped, another contraction seizing me, forcing me to double over. He sighed, a heavy, burdened sound. I'm in the middle of the Anderson negotiation. He murmured, more to himself than to me, before lifting the phone back to his ear. I'm going to have to go mobile. Keep talking, I'm listening. The car ride was a blur of terror and humiliation. He sat in the passenger seat, gripping the handle above the door as if it were the only thing tearing me to earth. The pain was escalating rapidly, coming in waves that left me breathless and lightheaded. It needed him. It needed his hand, his voice, his reassurance that our baby would be okay despite the early arrival. Instead, the interior of a luxury sedan was filled with the drone of his business persona. No more. The equity split is non-negotiable, Liam sighed, his voice filling the cabin via the Bluetooth speaker. He navigated the traffic with one hand, his eyes flicking between the road and the dashboard screen displaying the call duration. If they want to walk, let them walk. They need you as more than we need them. Liam, it hurts, he whimpered, the words strangled. I think something is wrong. It's too fast. He didn't even glance at me. He just tapped the volume up on the steering wheel to drown out my distress. Listen to me, Mark. He don't care about the quarterly projections. He cared about the closing date. Get it done today. He stared at his profile, the sharp jawline, the steely focus. He was right, sir, inches away, yet he was continents apart. He was bringing his child into the world, terrified our baby wasn't ready to breathe on its own, and he was negotiating equity splits. The isolation in that car was colder than the air conditioning blasting against my sweat-dampened skin. He realized then, through the haze of agony, that he wasn't a wife or a partner. He was an inconvenience, a logistical hurdle in his schedule. When we screeched up to the hospital entrance, Tobile rushed over. He practically fell out of the car, my legs trembling. Nurses appeared with a wheelchair, their faces masks of professional urgency. They Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam the fear in my eyes, but Wally caught my belly. Where is the father? One of the nurses asked as they began to wheel me rapidly toward the automatic doors. He looked back. Liam was standing by the driver's side, not moving to follow. He was pacing a tight circle, gesturing wildly with his free hand. The phone still glued to his ear. He held up a finger to the valet, signaling him to wait. He's coming, he lied, though the word tasted like ash. The triage room was a flurry of activity. Monitors were strapped to me, ifs inserted, questions fired too fast for me to answer. The baby's heart rate was erratic. The doctor's face was grim. We need to move. You're fully dilated, and the baby is in distress. We're going to the delivery room now. My husband, he managed to rest out between gasps of nitrous oxide. Please get my husband. A nurse nodded and he ran out. Eliezer, my legs in stirrups, the room spinning, praying for the door to open and for Liam to rush in. He finally dropped the facade and he paid the money thought he married. He needed to see fear for US in his eyes, not calculations. The door swung open. Liam stood sir. He was still in his suite, his tie perfectly knotted, his phone in his hand. The nurse behind him looked apologetic. Liam, he cried out, reaching a hand toward him. It's time. The baby is in trouble. I'm scared. He didn't step forward. He stood in the threshold, the sterile hospital light reflecting off his polished shoes. His phone buzzed, a harsh, vibrating sound that chewed through the beeping of the monitors. He looked down at the screen, and Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the calculation happened in real time. It wasn't a struggle, it was a decision. He looked up at me, his eyes devoid of warmth. They were flat, dead things. It's the investors from Tokyo. He sighed, his voice steady, devoid of the panic that was consuming me. If we don't take this, the merger collapses. He can't be in here for this. The air left the room. The doctor paused, looking up from his preparations, stunned. Sir, your wife is about to deliver. Your child is thriving. And this deal provides for the child. Liam snapped, defensive now, justifying the unforgivable. He looked at me one last time, not with love, but with a chilling detachment. You have the doctors. You'll be fine. You need quiet for this call. I'll remain in the car. Liam, no more. He screamed, the betrayal hitting me harder than any contraction. Don't you dare walk away. Don't you dare leave me. But he was already turning. He didn't look back. The heavy door swung shut, sealing him out, sealing me in. The silence he left behind was deafening, louder than the machinery, louder than my own heart hammering against my ribs. He had made his choice. In the most vulnerable, terrifying, transformative moment of our lives, he had chosen America over the birth of his son. He had chosen money over the blood and the bone of his own family. Okay? The doctor sighed softly, his voice thick with a pity in one. Focus on me. Just look at me. We're going to do this together. Tears streamed down my face. Hot and blinding, mixing with the sweat. He wasn't crying from the pain anymore. He was mourning. As he bore down, pushing with every ounce of strength he had left, he knew that the life he was bringing into the world was beginning exactly as my marriage was ending. He was screaming, my body tearing apart to bring forth life. But inside, something had already died. He was utterly, completely alone. The contractions came in waves of white-hot agony that seemed to tear through the very fabric of my existence, leaving me gasping for air in the sterile, over-oxygenated atmosphere of the delivery room. The lights overhead were merciless, humming with a fluorescent buzzing sound that drilled into my temples, exposing every bit of sweat and every grimace of pain. He gripped the cold metal railing of the bed until my knuckles turned the color of bone, my eyes squinting shut against the glare, trying to find a rhythm, a center, anything to anchor me to reality. You are doing great, honey. Just breathe. Deep breath in, slow breath out, the nurse sighed. Her voice was kind, layered with the professional sympathy of someone who had seen this tableau 1,000 times. But she was a stranger. Her hand on my shoulder was gentle, but it was not the hand he had been promised. He opened my eyes and he looked at the empty chair beside the bed. It was a standard hospital recliner, upholstered in cracking blue vinyl, and his emptiness screamed louder than my own vocal cords ever could. The chair was supposed to be occupied. It was supposed to be the place where Liam held my hand, wiped my forehead, and he whispered the assurances that we had practiced in those prenatal classes he had half-heartedly attended. Instead, it sat there as a monument to his absence, a hollow space that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Where is he? He whispered between grit teeth as another contraction began to crest, tightening around my lower back like a vice. I'm sure he's on his way. The nurse lied softly, checking the monitor. Focus on the baby now. Focus on you. But he couldn't. In the crucible of childbirth, the veil of denial he had worn for months finally incinerated. He wasn't just giving birth alone. He had been living alone. The pain of the contractions was physical, a biological imperative that my body knew how to handle. But the ache in my chest was something entirely different. It was the crushing weight of abandonment. He was bringing a life into the world, and the man he had helped create it, the man who had vowed to be my partner in all things, had chosen a boardroom over the birthroom. Okay? I need you to push now, the doctor commanded, moving into position at the foot of the bed. He screamed, arrow, primal sound that tore from my throat, channeling every ounce of betrayal and fear into the effort. He pushed against the pain, pushed against the loneliness, and he pushed against the phantom of the marriage he thought he had. With one final, earth-shattering exertion, the pressure released, replaced by a sudden, stunned silence that was broken seconds later by a wet, indignant cry. It's Saburi, the doctor announced, her voice softening. They placed him on my chest. A warm, slippery weight that instantly grounded me. He looked down at his scrunched, red face, his tiny fingers grasping at the eye, and he felt the world tilt on its axis. The tears that finally spilled over my cheeks weren't for Liam. They were for this tiny, fragile being who deserved a father who showed up. In that moment of desolate courage, holding my son while after birth was managed and the nurses bustled around me, the flickering candle of hope he had held for my marriage was snuffed out. It didn't go out with a bang, but with a quiet, decisive hiss. He was a mother now. He didn't have the luxury of being a neglected wife anymore. Recovery was a blur of fetal checks and the quiet shuffling of hospital staff. It was hours later, long after the sun had set and the city lights outside the window painted the room in hues of orange and black, when the door finally creaked open. Liam walked in. He was still in his suite, his tie loosened, looking like a man who had just survived a war, rather than miss the most important moment of his life. He smelled of stale coffee and the distinct, sharp scent of high-stakes stress. He stopped at the foot of the bed, looking at a plastic bassinet where our son slept, then at me. He made it. He sighed, breathless, checking his watch. God, the traffic, and the negotiations ran over. They wouldn't let US break. He watched him from the bed, feeling a strange, glassy calm settle over me. He expected anger. He expected to scream at him, to throw the pitcher of water at his head. But there was nothing. Just a vast, frozen tundra where my love used to be. He was born 6 hours ago. Liam, he sighed. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, flat, steady, and stripped of all pleading. Liam flinched, running a hand through his hair. He walked over to the bassinet and he looked down, a flicker of emotion crossing his face before the mask of the provider slammed back into place. He turned to me, his expression shifting into the familiar, defensive crouch. You know, I'm sorry you wasn't here for the moment. He began, his hands gesturing vaguely. But you have to understand, this deal it secures the bonus. It secures the college fund. He did this for him. He did this for US. You weren't here. He repeated, the words simple and damning. I'm doing this for our financial security. Liam's voice rose slightly, the defensive conviction hardening his tone. He looked at me as if he were a child who couldn't grasp the complexities of the adult world. Do you think you wanted to be in a conference room? He made a sacrifice today. He swallowed my pride and he stayed in that meeting so that you and he wouldn't have to worry about money. That is what a father does. He genuinely believed it. That was the tragedy of it all. He stood, sir, vibrating with self-righteousness, completely failing to grasp the immeasurable depth of the chasm he had created. He thought money could patch the hole where his presence should have been. He thought providing a lifestyle was the same as providing a life. You missed his birth, he sighed, shifting my gaze from him to the sleeping infant. You can buy him everything in the world, Liam, but you cannot buy the fact that when he took his first breath, you were negotiating a contract. You're being hormonal, he snapped, the fatigue fraying his edges. You're exhausted. We'll talk about this when you're rational. I'm here now, aren't you? He reached out to touch my arm, but he pulled away. It wasn't a violent recoil. It was a simple removal of access. He picked up my son, cradling him against my chest, creating a closed circuit of affection that had no more entry point for Liam. Yes, you're here now, he sighed softly, looking down at the baby's sleeping face, tracing the curve of his ear. But it doesn't matter anymore. Liam stared at me, confusion clouding his features. He opened his mouth to argue, to explain the logic of his world again. But the silence he offered him was impenetrable. He didn't know it yet, but he had just become a stranger in his own family. As he moved to the uncomfortable blue chair, the one that had been empty when it mattered most, and he pulled out his phone to check his emails, the realization crystallized in my mind with stark, terrifying clarity. He wasn't angry at him for working. He wasn't even angry at him for missing the birth. He was finished. He looked at the man checking his screen, the blue light illuminating a face that had once been my entire world. He was an illusion. The partnership he had fought for, the emotional connection he had begged for, the shared burden he had prayed for, it was all a fantasy he had constructed to survive the loneliness. He adjusted the blanket around my son, feeling the fierce, steely resolve forge itself in the fire of my heart. He was a mother, and he was a protector. And as he watched Liam type a reply to a client, oblivious to the fact that his marriage had died in the room, he knew the truth. He was navigating this voyage entirely on my own. The waters would be rough, and the nights would be long, but he would no more longer drown waiting for a lifeguard who was never going to jump in. He was the captain now, and he sailed alone. The silence in the house used to be a heavy, suffocating blanket that smelled of stale arguments and suppressed tears. Now, however, the silence was mine. It was no more longer a void where he waited for Liam's temper to flare. It was a workspace. The moment the front door clicked shut behind him, signaling his departure for the office, the transformation took hold. The weeping woman who begged for understanding was gone, dissolved by the harsh realization that understanding was not something Liam was capable of giving. In her place stood a strategist, cold and efficient, moving through the rooms of our immaculately kept prison with the precision of a soldier behind enemy lines. He walked into the kitchen, not to patch anxiously as he once did, but to make coffee strong, black, and purely for fuel. My hands didn't tremble. There was a clarity in my mind that felt almost icy, a sharp contrast to the feverish emotional fog he had lived in for years. He had stopped reacting to his provocations days ago, when he had sneered at my choice of dress the previous evening, expecting the usual defense or the hard look in my eyes. He had simply changed without a word. He had looked confused, then smart, thinking he had finally broken my spirit. He didn't realize that compliance was merely the camouflage he wore while he plotted the war. My first objective was documentation. He knew Liam kept the household files in the mahogany desk in his study, a room he was implicitly forbidden from entering without reason. He checked the time on the oven clock. He had exactly 8 hours before his return, barring any surprise visits, which were rare but possible. He moved to the study, my footsteps light on the hardwood. The door was locked, of course. Liam loved locks. They were physical manifestations of his control, but he had watched him for years, observing where he absent-mindedly tossed his keys when he changed into his casual clothes. He retrieved the spare key from the back of the bottom drawer in the mudroom, a hiding spot he believed was clever but was actually quite predictable. The click of the lock turning was the loudest sound in the room. He slid the door open, my heart beating in a slow, rhythmic thud, not out of fear, but out of adrenaline. He flipped through the hanging files until he found the thick manila envelope labeled personal. Inside were our passports, our marriage license, and most importantly, my son's birth certificate. He didn't take them. Not yet. To take them now would be to trip the alarm wire. Instead, he took my phone out and he photographed every single page, ensuring the text was legible and the edges were clean. Then, He carefully placed everything back exactly as he had found it, measuring the distance of the papers from the edge of the folder with my thumb to ensure perfect alignment. He locked the drawer and he returned the key to the mudroom. He had the digital copies. Now he could apply for replacements or use them for legal consultations without him noticing a thing. Next was the money. Financial abuse was subtle. He had access to credit cards, but he monitored every transaction. He had no more cash, no more savings in my own name. That had to change. And it had to change in invisible increments. He had already begun the process of siphoning. He drove to the grocery store, a mundane errand that raised no more suspicions. At the checkout, he requested $50 in cash but a small enough amount to be lost in the total of our weekly grocery bill, dismissed as a miscellaneous household expense. He had been doing this 3 times a week at different stores. It was slow, agonizingly slow, but the stack of bills hidden inside a hollowed-out winter boot in the back of my closet was growing. But $50 hit and sure wouldn't buy a new life. He needed a war chest. He drove to a high-end consignment shop 2 towns over, a place where no one in our social circle would ever venture. In my purse, wrapped in a silk scarf, was a diamond tennis bracelet Liam had given me after the incident last Christmas, the apology gift for a bruise that had taken 2 weeks to fade. I'd like to sell this outright, he told the appraiser, my voice steady. I don't want to wait for consignment. The woman looked at the bracelet, then at me. She sallallahu alaihi wasallam the quality of the diamonds. And perhaps she sallallahu alaihi wasallam something in my eyes, a harness that suggested he was and selling it for drug money. But for survival, she named a price. It was less than half of what Liam had paid, but it was thousands of dollars in untraceable cash. Deal, he sighed. Walking out of the shop with an envelope of heavy bills pressed against my side was the first time he felt truly powerful. He wasn't just a wife anymore. He was a separate entity with resources. He drove to a bank he had researched and land one with no more affiliation to Liam's business dealings, and he deposited the cash into a new account opened under my maiden name. He opted for paperless statements, accessible only through a burner email address. He checked only at the public library. By the time he returned home, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the living room. He fetched my son, Leo, from his nap. He was 3 years old, soft and warm and smelling of lavender soap. As he held him, he rested his head on my shoulder, his small hand gripping my shirt. Mama, he murmured. I'm here, baby, he whispered into his hair. I'm right here. He looked at his reflection in the hallway mirror. He looked so much like Liam, but his eyes were mine. For the longest time, he had stayed because he thought he couldn't deprive him of a father, or because he believed Liam's threats that he would take Leo away from me if he ever tried to leave. But the fear had transmuted into resolve. Leaving was no more longer a risk. Staying was the danger. He was building a bridge, plank by plank, that would carry Leo from a house of walking on eggshells to a place where he could run and shout without fear. When Liam came home at evening, the house was immaculate. Dinner was simmering on the stove, and Leo was quietly playing with his blocks. He was chopping vegetables, the knife moving with rhythmic precision. "You're home early," he sighed, not turning around, keeping my tone light and breezy. He felt his presence behind me before he spoke. He loomed, a habit he used to dominate the space. The traffic was light. "Did you go today?" It was a test. It was always a test. "Just for groceries," he sighed, turning to face him with a calm smile that didn't read my eyes, though he never looked deep enough to notice. "And he picked up the dry cleaning you needed." He scanned me, looking for a crack in the eddy, looking for the nervous tick or the defensive stammer. He gave him nothing but placid domesticity. "Kid," he grunted, loosening his tie. "I'm starving." We sat at the dinner table, at the blow of the perfect family. He talked about his day, complaining about incompetent subordinates and the deals he was maneuvering. He listened, nodding at the appropriate intervals, asking questions that stroked his ego. Inside, he was calculating. 3,000 in the new account, digital copies secure, a consultation with a divorce attorney scheduled for next Tuesday while he's in Chicago. "You're quiet tonight," Liam noted, pausing with his fork halfway to his mouth. "Everything alright?" In the past, he would have panicked. He would have over-explained, trying to fill the silence to prove he wasn't plotting. Now, he just took a sip of water, and he met his gaze. "I'm just tired," he lied smoothly. Leo was active today, but he was thinking about what you said regarding the summer vacation. "You're right, we should plan something relaxing." He relaxed, visibly grinning at the concession. "I'm glad you're finally seeing sense. You've been better lately, less hysterical." He halfly agreed, and the words tasted like ash, but he swallowed them down. He realized he needed to focus on what's important. "Exactly," he sighed, returning to his meal. He had no more idea. He thought what's important meant him, his comfort, his image. He couldn't hear the screaming monologue in my head, the blueprints being drawn, the logistics being mapped. He didn't know that every time he agreed with him now, it was a tactical retreat to preserve energy for the final strike. Later that night, as Liam snored beside me, a heavy, oppressive sound that usually kept me awake with anxiety, he lay perfectly still. He stared at the ceiling, visualizing the apartment listings he had memorized earlier. Small, two-bedroom units in a neighborhood 40 minutes away, close enough to my potential job prospects, far enough to be inconvenient for him. He imagined the color of the walls, the lock on the door but only had a key, the sound of Leo laughing in a room where no air wasn't thick with tension. He mentally rehearsed the departure. It would have to be on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were his long strategy meetings. He couldn't leave the office, and his phone would be off for 4 hours. 4 hours was an eternity. 4 hours was enough to pay the essentials, pick up Leo from daycare, and he crossed the state line. He rolled over, turning my back to him, pulling the duvet tight around my shoulders. A single tear threatened to fall, not from sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming pressure of the secret he was carrying. He blinked it away. He couldn't afford tears. Tears were liquid weakness, and he needed to be made of stone. He closed my eyes and he let the darkness take me, not into a nightmare, but into a plan. The bridge was being built. The documents were the foundation. The money was the structure, and Imawa was the mortar holding it all together. He was no more longer a victim waiting for the next blow. He was an architect, and he was designing my freedom. The morning he initiated the end of our marriage was not marked by the stormy hysterics Liam might have expected. There were no more thrown daisies, no more screaming matches that echoed through the hollow halls of the sterile mansion we had called a home. Instead, there was only a terrifying, crystal clear calm. My preparations were complete. He had moved assets with the stealth of a ghost, secured a modest but warm apartment across the city, and he packed the essentials for myself and my son, while Liam was distracted by yet another merger acquisition. He walked into his study, the room smelling of expensive leather and neglect. He was on a call, his back to me, gesturing at the eye as if conducting an orchestra of invisible subordinates. He waited. When he finally hung up and he spun his chair around, he looked at me with the familiar, distracted glaze, his mind still lingering on stock prices and the profit margins. "I'm leaving, Liam," he sighed. My voice was steady, lacking the tremor that used to plague me whenever he tried to ask for his attention in the past. He blinked, a half smile touching his lips as if he had told a mild joke. "Leaving? For the spa? Take the driver, Helena. I need the SUV for a dinner meeting later." "No more," he corrected him, stepping forward and placing a thick manila envelope on the mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy thud that seemed to suck the air out of the room. "Yeah, I'm leaving the marriage. Those are the separation papers. My lawyer has already contacted yours. I'm taking the baby, and I'm not coming back." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the grinding gears of a man trying to process a loss he hadn't anticipated on his balance sheet. By the time he stood up, his face flushing with the dawn of comprehension, he was already walking out the door. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. He had just induced the most painful labor of my life, not the physical birth of my son, which he had done largely alone, but the agonizing delivery of my own freedom, which passed in a blur of quiet reconstruction. The new apartment was smaller, but it was filled with light and devoid of shadows. He learned to breathe again. He learned that the silence of solitude was infinitely preferable to the silence of being ignored. He was building a routine, a sanctuary where my son would know he was the center of the world, not an accessory to a lifestyle. Then came the inevitable knock. It wasn't a polite tap. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of a man who believes he owns the wood beneath his fist. He opened the door to find Liam standing there. He looked different, frayed around the edges, his tie loosened, his eyes burning with a mixture of sleeplessness and the wounded pride. He had finally realized that the silence from my end was permanent. "You can't do this," he sighed, skipping the pleasantries. He tried to push past me, but he blocked the doorway with my body. For the first time, he felt physically immovable, rooted by my conviction. "You have rights, Helena. I am his father. You can't just steal my family away because you're feeling emotional." "Emotional?" He repeated the word, tasting the irony. "You have never been more rational, Liam. And you are not here because you miss US. You are here because you lost something, and you hate losing. I'm here because you want to see my son," he shouted, the veneer of corporate cool cracking. "He worked hard for this family. He built an empire for him to inherit. Doesn't that count for anything? You have a right to be a father." He looked at him, really looked at him, and sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the tragedy of a man who thought love was a transaction. He thought he could buy shares in his child's life whenever the market favored him. Being a father isn't a title you claim when it suits your schedule, Liam, he sighed, my voice low but cutting through his bluster. It isn't about the inheritance you leave behind. It's about the time you put in now. It's about being set for the first fever, the first step, the sleepless nights where he needed to be held, not financed. It can change, he pleaded, the aggression shifting to desperation. I'll hire less help. I'll make time on weekends. We can work this out. Don't punish me for working hard. I am not punishing you, he replied, feeling a profound sense of closure was over me. I am protecting him. You had your chance. You chose the boardroom over the delivery room. You chose your phone over his cries. Genuine love and the consistent presence are not commodities you can deliver belatedly. Liam, they are the commitments nurtured in real time. Your time for the commitment has passed. He stared at me, stunned. He opened his mouth to argue, to negotiate, to use the tactics that crushed his competitors, but he found nothing. He was facing a wall of absolute resolve. Go home, Liam, he said softly. Go back to the empire you built. It's the only thing that will never leave you, because it's the only thing you truly love. He closed the door. The latch clicked a sharp, final sound that severed the last thread connecting me to the ghost of the woman he used to be. He leaned my back against the wood and he listened to his footsteps retreat down the hallway, heavy and defeated. Turning round, he walked into the living room where my son was playing on the floor. He looked up and he smiled, a pure, unadulterated expression of joy that required no more negotiation. He picked him up, feeling the solid weight of him against my chest. The fear that had once paralyzed me was gone, replaced by a fierce, burning pride. He had navigated a storm. He had severed a limb to save the body. He was no more longer the neglected wife waiting for scraps of affection in a cold mansion. He was Helene. He was a mother who had secured a future of dignity and self-respect. He stood in the center of my modest, sunlit room, holding my child, finally and completely unbroken.